But we wanted someone who'd seen the movies and liked stars, who hadn't thought about it the way we had, to be able to pick up this book in a bookstore and flip through it and find things that they knew. And then that still left a huge amount of work. And so the question was how we're going to do this. And we really did it kind of two ways. One was, we might have planet X that had never been placed anywhere, and we would want to put it in location Y on one of these new maps. And so in that case, what we do is we just look at all the notes we had for every time this would come up and try to figure out if it would work there. The other way we would do it was essentially turning this process around. We would have like location Y that we needed a planet with some kind of characteristics to it, like maybe it was a mining world, or the empire had taken it over, or it had been attacked by slavers or something. And so in that case, we'd go through the database, we'd make a list of worlds that might fit the bill, and then we'd go through the notes and try to figure out why they wouldn't work. And at the end of that, you'd have a few worlds, or one world, or sometimes no worlds, and we just go from there. And by the end of each one of these investigations, there'd be like a 3-foot pile of Star Wars books, like next to the desk. You'd have to search through all these things and go back to try not to make a mistake. And if you do that thousands and thousands of times, you wind up with an atlas. It was brute force, but it was a labor of love that brought out that brute force. Along the way though, we had an enormous amount of fun. Dan, my co-author, wrote. He's always loved like the wonders of the ancient world. So he did this great chapter on the wonders of the galaxy. He made up like all these like cool things, most of which have been lost. I had always been interested. Believe it or not, there's an opera for the Star Wars galaxy that had been described very briefly, and that I thought would be kind of cool to explain something that needed explanation. And so I made up. It kind of got crazier as I started doing it. I thought, do I really want to do this? I made up this synopsis for the opera, complete with like song titles and characters and stuff like that. And then I was lucky enough, I have a good friend who's an opera director, and so I said, this is like the weirdest request you've ever had, but can you look at this and tell me if it has any relation to actual opera? And he was like, okay. So we did, and he was like, it's actually kind of like Wagner. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. My kid loved this book called The Maverick Moon, which was printed in 1979 and immediately disappeared, so I was able to like write this very strange part of that story back into the atlas, which was this totally forgotten part of it, and made him very happy. So there's all sorts of fun stuff like that. But then, in doing that, we of course made lots and lots of maps, and we started out making just sketch maps. This was the first map we ever did for the atlas. It was just me sketching hut space where Jabba's rather evil people live. And we made another one. This was the Hapes cluster, which all these little X's are supposed to be like nebulae. Our eventual map maker, eventually he had a fit one day over email, thank God, and he was like, every map you make, you have to fill with these stupid nebulae. They're really a pain in the butt to draw, and there aren't that many in a real galaxy. I wish you'd stop it. And I was like, oh, dude, I'm sorry, I just really love nebulae. And we got through it. And one thing we needed to do, though, we needed an overall galaxy map. And we found there was a Star Wars fan out there on the web who had made this like terrific series of handmade maps. And we got corresponding with him, and we said, keep this quiet, but we're working on this book, and we'd like to ask you a favor. Can we use your basic map to kind of plot out what we're doing? He said, oh, sure, yeah, sure. He was a very nice guy. And in talking with him, he went by the internet name handle or whatever, Modi, and he saved us from all these mistakes. And we realized that he was one of the like 3 or 4 people in the world who knew as much about Star Wars geography as we did. And he was really, really, really invaluable. We also found out he was a really great artist. And so eventually we said, we'd like to make you an official part of this project. What we have in mind is we'd like you to kind of help us and produce draft maps, and those will get handed over to another map artist for the final process. And he was like, okay, great. And then, the more of his maps we saw, we said, he doesn't need a second artist. He's really that good. He can do it. And this was when Modi kind of sheepishly admitted to us, he was like, yeah, you know, that's great, I'd love to help you, but I'm 17 and I live in Hungary. And we were like, wow, really? And we kind of gulped and we thought about it, and we were like, well, okay, first of all, this kind of thing could only happen on the web. But also we were like, well, okay, what does it matter that he's 17 and lives far away? He's still the best guy for this. And we went to Delray, we went to Lucasfilm, and they all had kind of the same reaction we did. They kind of gulped and were like, well, he's still the best guy. And so he became our lead of two very talented map makers, which I always thought was just, you know, it's a wonderful story. I've collaborated with this guy across an ocean on this really fun book, and you know, he has this great cover credit, and I've never met him, and I don't even know his real name, but we've worked on the books together. It's pretty cool. Next one. And so working on stuff like this, I became kind of like the world's worst kind of Photoshop hack, and I would hack together maps like this for Modi to turn into something real. And to show you some of the things he can do, like that's Hut Space when he got done with it. And this is the Hapes cluster, complete with the nebulae, which I think actually look kind of cool. And this is the military map you just saw in rough form. One really interesting thing about doing maps of a made-up galaxy is just, you know, when you've got thousands of worlds that were made with no map, you inevitably get these contradictions. You get things that don't work. And you know, it's like if you're trying to figure out where Philadelphia was and you didn't have a map of the eastern United States, but you had like clues. You know, like Philadelphia is 96 miles from New York City, and Philadelphia is on the Schuylkill River. And if you get enough clues like that, you could be like, okay, Philadelphia has to be here. And you'd be like, okay, great, let's have it. But when you get contradictions like you do in Star Wars, you have other stuff like, you know, Philadelphia is 96 miles, says this one source, but another source says it's 185 miles from New York City, and one source says it's on the Schuylkill, and one source says it's on the Chesapeake. And eventually you're like, well, these things cannot be true, and we just have to pick something and hope that one author or another, or one fan or another doesn't get too mad at us. So we had to do things like that, and our answer to that was always just kind of to preserve the spirit of what was intended as best we could. So eventually we had our book done, we had the maps were finished, and this was when the book's art really took shape. And this is a great lesson for me, really, as an author working on my first really big book, that, you know, we had these roughed out maps, we had our text, but, you know, just watching what happens with a book like the Atlas after that is really amazing. I mean, Modi was helped by Chris Reif, this very, very talented artist, as a second map maker, and then for illustrations we had Chris Trevis and Ian Fullwood. Just wonderful artists to work with. I'll show you some of the things we did. This is a page we did for planets. One reason I said how we wanted to make the book really accessible. We have the center section of the Atlas is all these planets that are well known from the Star Wars galaxy, and we went out of our way to make sure that all the main movie planets would be in there. So again, casual fans would have something to get to.